All right, what's up? Going to be talking a little bit about Kevin. Why I really like him as a unit, why I think he has a lot of potential in the game, and the overall idea behind him that I think is really good. So Kevin is generally known as a strong early game unit, right? Strong early game unit that can carry you before you get Slime King, and after you do manage to obtain Slime King, you just use Slime King to farm through your JR hard, get your JR hard complete, and maybe drop Slime King later, right? There are better ways to farm the classic levels, better monsters for the end game levels. And these are sort of the early game monsters that you don't really think about as you continue to progress, right? Like Slime King is not used in maximum efficiency farming setups because he does briefly pause the game every time he does ult, right? Kevin is dropped because Kevin is slightly inferior to Slime King as an overall damage dealer in the mid to late game, right? And so when you think about these two units, I think a lot of the focus on their value after the mid to early game really gets taken away. But I think particularly for Kevin has a lot of potential overall because of Kevin's design. So if you don't know this about Kevin is able to do all three types of elemental damage. And this is not really going to be used that much in the early stage of the game, right? Where Kevin is mainly utilized, but it's a very, very game-changing stat in the late to end game, right? Because what that allows you to do is that allows you to basically have Kevin slightly counter each of the elements, right? Each of the elements can be countered by Kevin. There is potential for Kevin to do something about them, potential for him to be able to interact with them and to be able to get a positive advantage against them. Despite Kevin being a cheap unit, despite him being an early game unit, he still can be utilized later on. And especially with challenges such as IQT, which I'll showcase here in a second, Kevin is really just a strong budget option, right? And what I mean by that is that if you can't invest the time and resources into upgrading, a mythic setup or a very expensive rare setup to farm something like IQT, I think what Kevin provides is sort of like a sampling or sort of like a tasting menu for the for the elemental challenge. So I think that's a pretty bad way to put it, but I think that's what Kevin can do. As you see here, sometimes advantageous damages, sometimes not so advantageous damages, right? Kevin is able to interact with these units and be able to get through quite a few ways with IQT actually with the right setup, despite him being a cheap unit, despite him being a unit obtainable in the early game, and despite him being a unit that is not really super efficient for these challenges, right? I think what Kevin enables the player to do is to be able to access these sort of end game levels to a certain degree without investing all the time and resources it would normally take. And I think that's overall a good thing because it adds more options when someone's choosing to play the game, right? It creates more depth in the game. It's not just you have to do XYZ, you have to auto clicker 24/7, you have to reroll a bunch of mythics, do all that sort of stuff, right? What Kevin allows you to do is basically be able to get past certain points of the game without achieving all of those complex or difficult to obtain parts of the game, right? You see here, I did lose the wave at wave 3. This is definitely not the best setup to be utilizing Kevin in. There are plenty of strong budget setups to use Kevin's in IQT. Can get to something like, wave 18, wave 20 in normal. Can allow someone who does not grind the game as much to be able to actually experience part of the end game, right? Kevin can be utilized in any of the classic levels. You can bring him to a nightmare level, you can bring him to regular farming levels, you can use him to complete JR normal, right? Provided, Kevin is high enough level. My Kevin is only level 406. If you got him to level 500, I'm sure he could be a solid damage dealer in the nightmare levels, right? He can maybe even be your main carrier, maybe a secondary damage dealer, right? Kevin just really enables someone who doesn't have all the resources in the game to be able to experience a lot of the parts of the game, right? A very versatile unit, a unit that can get you through parts of the game that normally would require a lot of grinding, right? And I don't mean that Kevin is a strong or ideal unit to use in these sort of endgame challenges. Like, as you see here, Kevin is even struggling a bit on wave 3, wave 2 of Volcano Goddess normal, right? And so, this is of course a cause of Kevin not being fully leveled, right? But it's also because Kevin has the ability to get through at least some of this level and to be able to I guess showcase some of this level to a certain degree, right? Kevin is not going to be your best option for these levels, but provided you can get him to a high enough level, provided that you do have a correct and proper setup to utilize them, he can be useful for these levels, right? Again, have him at level 500, have a strong supporting setup in the back, right? Maybe have You know, maybe utilize an Archimedes, maybe, of course, Slime King is good, you know, Death Bite's good. Felina maybe not so good. Mighty decent. You might need a Horus. You might need better stuns. This is just a, like, I'm not showcasing a good Kevin setup, right? I'm just trying to explain why Kevin has the potential to be used in these parts of the game. And I think, you know, there's a lot of room to work with Kevin. That 3-element trait is not only just good in budget endgame setups, right? It's also good if the devs ever try to create some sort of multi-elemental challenge level, right? This idea of one unit being able to do multiple types of damages is really strong, right? It allows the unit to be versatile. It allows them to carry despite their element not always being ideal. And, you know, Kevin doesn't gain buffs, elemental buffs, from something such as Greek gods, but you can still utilize them with something like Hellhound and still utilize them with something like Mighty. Of course, Speedy and Horus can be used on anyone. Yeah, I think that's all I want to talk about in this video, just why I think, you know, Kevin has a lot of potential. He's not the best unit, but the concept and idea behind him that can allow a newer player to basically sample endgame parts of the game, see what it's like. I think it's, you know, really good overall, and especially the idea behind budget setups that don't really utilize mythicals. I think that's a really good idea, right? Because it incorporates a lot of strategy. You have to think past spamming a bunch of mythics, you know, taking a setup that you found on Discord or Facebook or something like that, and you actually need to think about, how am I going to make the best out of the limited units I have? What are the best setups where I can use this Kevin to actually create a setup that can get, you know, decently far in an endgame challenge, right? It's not easy creating a setup with Kevin despite the limitations, right? You're working from a smaller unit pool, but you're also working from a weaker unit pool. And I think that's what really I like about Kevin. It creates more strategy, creates another option to play the game, another way to play the game. Yeah, that's pretty much all I want to talk about today. Kind of a rambly video, you know, I wasn't really talking about anything specific here, just wanted to say why I really like Kevin. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, not, see ya.